We really haven't talked about audience, though. And we said science centers. I mean, that's what it sounds like that we said. And we want both history and science in it together as a unit. But even in science centers, exhibits that attract vastly different audiences. Yep. Right? We had something on pirates, right? It attracts kids of a certain age, right? And their parents have to go, right? And you have something like Dead Sea Scrolls or something like that at the other end, right? Which is really incredibly boring to kids, right? So where do we want this to be?
I'm curious, did your museum carry the Einstein exhibit at the Field Museum?
We didn't.
No. And then
but I saw it in New York, so.
Right. And then there was another
which was a good exhibit.
Yeah, George Washington Carver. I'm thinking of exhibits that kind of do this history science thing, and those are the only two that I'm aware of.
Da Vinci.
Well, the Darwin.
Da Vinci's a big one.
The Darwin did. The Darwin did too.
Darwin, yes.
Would be a good one too.
But you had a question.
And the answer is?
No.
It's about audience.
Well, does anybody before you ask the next question, is there any answer to this first question?
I was just going to say, the fact that these weapons are destructive would just be part of the story. That's, after all, what they are. You would have to show that somehow. It doesn't, and I would assume that would produce a certain amount of understandable fear on the part of the people who are looking at the display.
We went to a display at the Denver Museum of Natural History several years ago, and it was a computer display where you could change the size of the asteroid that was headed toward Earth. And my son blew up the Earth so many times.
Of course.
So it is. It's fun for kids to blow stuff up. But, when you see the pictures of Hiroshima that aren't sanitized, that have the bodies, it's not so much fun anymore. And so...
Did you hear about the meteor that just hit Russia?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I saw it.
Anyway.
Is this the...
Chelyabinsk.
Not the big one.
Well, and you have a problem with showing those images, of course. I'm sure the exhibit should, but that's a tough one. People don't like to see those.
Yeah, and that's, that goes back to the whole Enola Gay thing. One of the big things was that the objects from Hiroshima that were being displayed, a lunchbox, a watch, a dead body, those are very emotional.
Tricycle.
Yeah, a tricycle, an airplane, not so emotional, and so your good guy story doesn't have that same emotional tie to it that your bad guy story has, and so, it kind of brings us back to some of our other discussions we've had. How do we display that? And then again, too, audiences. Your science center audiences are going to be your younger audiences. Your history museum audiences are older, and so if you're doing this exhibit, how do you get both of them?
There's another way that you sometimes get at that, though, and that is that you have the character, you have a fictitious or a real character at each age group in the exhibit. So your exhibit is the Manhattan Project, and you have young researcher, you have child, you have older individual. So the person coming into the exhibit just gravitates to that age group, and you sort of are describing the situations in various contexts from the vantage point of that individual and their age in that group. So you can pull them in. You can give each one a place, so to speak. The problem is, how do you balance the emotions? Because some are more informed than others. Those who are less informed might have emotional circumstance. The child's caught up in it. The researcher becomes a provocateur in it. How you choose that individual is a little tricky sometimes.
I really think it would help detox all of this if we thought of this in terms of technology and not bombs. I don't mean the exhibit doesn't have to deal with bombs, but I could make the same case about the introduction of coal into the world. There were wonderful changes that came to the world, including the Industrial Revolution, and untold millions have died of lung diseases and bad coal mining practices and so forth.
But we did make the decision to mine coal so that we could stop a war or
not as obviously, to be sure, but the whole British Empire thing grew out of their having gotten into the Industrial Revolution a little earlier than everybody else.
It wasn't destructive.
it wasn't destructive to start with, insofar as its original coal mining, what it was used for was to build industrial.
Yeah.
Right.
It wasn't
So
designed.
I grant you it's a little more
It
indirect.
wasn't it's
But the point
mostly
is, technologies are always two-edged swords.
well, and some are more oriented toward one thing than another. I
Yeah.
mean, we could use a hammer for multiple things, but
Right.
its original purpose, right, hitting nails. So I think that part of the story of this technology is that it had a particular reason for coming into being at a particular moment.
And I think that's why it feels so toxic when we talk about it, because of its unusual birth circumstances.
Once you take that on, you've got to sort of go with that. I don't think you can
Yeah.
detoxify. I don't think you should.
No, I mean, just as we talk about it, I mean, this new technology is discovered, it's developed, it's then expanded, and now it's reached the point where we think it's maybe too much and we'd like to scale it back. I mean, that's the story.
You know, it's a funny thing. You'd never get away with doing this, but it's almost like you want to give an exhibit that says, "Could you build the bomb? Would you build a bomb?"
Ooh.
On the "could you" part, you go. The danger is the people that get on your site. You know, the first thing they want to know is, "How do I build one?" Okay, so you don't quite do that, but you show historically that you can.
Yeah.
And then you have another element, which is, would you? And under what circumstances would you build it, use it, whatever? The could you and would you is really kind of the combination of what we're dealing with here. And then there are obviously byproducts that come from that.
Right, and that's a way to get people into it. It's actually not a bad idea. I mean, if we've been talking about being provocative and challenging people, so could you? Yeah, you can. Here's the science behind it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Would you, knowing that you're going to have biological outcomes, that you're going to have environmental outcomes, that you're going to,
I think the point is that the could you is actually a history lesson. It's not it's not a cookbook. Here's the could you might get you through the door, but once they get in there, they're going to be disappointed that they can't build a bomb when they come out the other end.
What's your
For the
question?
makerspace.
Right.
The would you question could bring this internationally. You could say these countries, and you have pictures of the leaders speaking and saying, we have renounced this, we're not going to do this anymore, and kind of put different people's perspective. I mean, I don't know if you can get somebody from Israel to talk about it, but you could kind of bring it to say, maybe this is too, people warn me not to get too close to the present, but
the National Science Center of North Korea.
So here are the different considerations, and that would bring it up to today's news, sort of.
One of the things that I think you will learn if you do the could you, would you approach is one thing that you will learn is, from a science point of view, is that the could you is actually a lot more technically deep. It's a deeper issue, even technically, than people think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I keep going back to what somebody said, the secrets of the bomb. I think, well, first of all, the secrets of King Tut, whatever. It's got that attraction to, but you think about it, secrecy is so built into this whole thing, from the birth of the bomb, or unleashing the secrets of the atom, if you want to see that, but then the way Los Alamos was done, other places were done, and then the whole the whole proliferation kind of thing, all in secrecy. The detection, it's all about secrets. And it seems to me that is just a nice general theme for this. Plus, it has a secret in the title, to it.
Even the common phrase "unlocking the secrets of nature," in the form of the discovery of
and
fission.
then the disarmament is part of that. How do you're trying to detect all these kinds of things that are happening
Basically, you're
secretly?
trying to get rid of all the secrets in order to be able to
It's got a
discover
real.
weapons.
I think the secrecy comes out as a.
Well, actually, that is a great idea that I'm taking. I like the whole idea, but just focusing on unlocking the secrets of nature, you could show how that this, discoveries made in the context of atomic energy led to a lot of unlocking of secrets of nature. It led to the Human Genome Project, which then in turn, of course, has led to all of these medical advances in understanding of disease and functions and so forth. Stem cells.
I'm saying play on those two terms of it.
Go in those directions.
You can
Sure,
take
that's
them
a
as a
sustainable argument.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
I'm not trying to argue. I'm just saying.
No, but I'm not sure it's just a sustainable connection.
Construct? Why?
That's okay. There are others.
Anyway,
Just
details.
shoot through it. It wasn't the very best example, but there are others.
I want to go back and question a couple of assumptions. from the way we're talking, it's not at all a science exhibit. It's a technology exhibit. It's a history exhibit. It's an exhibit about why technology happens and what happens to it when it happens. So we don't even have to talk about a chain reaction, frankly.
True.
Talk about a what?
Chain reaction.
Yeah.
I certainly hope that there is science in it, because I think that that process, the understanding the secrets of the bomb, really means understanding some of that science.
But I don't think that's what we spent 90% of our time talking about.
That's true, which I think might be a problem.
I don't. Well, so here's a corollary to though, if we decide it's okay that it's not really a science exhibit, that it's an engineering, it's a science and society, it's a history exhibit. In that event, science centers are probably not the best place for it. History museums, and my sort of new favorite museums. There are as many of those as there are science centers. They're all over the country, all over the world. They have big space. And military technology is a part of almost all of them. So I think actually they would make a very receptive place. Their visitorship is families, but more weighted towards adults than most science centers are.
Aviation museums.
But I would say the people that go to those museums are predisposed to enjoy displays of military armaments and have that mindset about them. And I'm not sure it is the best audience for the entire gamut of ideas that we're talking about here, really.
I agree. We would be stretching them and asking them to look at armaments in a somewhat different way, and I think that's a good thing to do.
Well, I wouldn't say don't go there, but I'd say, and I actually think science centers, well, actually they're science and technology centers mostly. And this is big technology, not just big science.
And
it's
science
big
and
technology.
industry.
Anyway, I don't agree
So
that
I
this
think
isn't
it's
about science.
Perfect for those.
None of this would have been possible without these fundamental scientific discoveries.
No, there's definitely a science component to it.
Yes,
I'm just saying that
right.
most of the things that have sparked discussion around this table have not been, the cross section of U-235. It has been about these motivations. Another suggestion that I'd like to make is to think about this as an international exhibit. I can see this being much more warmly received and anticipated in England and France and Germany and Denmark and Sweden, where science and society is much more popular topic to talk about, and they have many more exhibits than we tend to have in this country that do look at the historical and social dimensions of technology.
Right.
The important thing to think about when we do that, though, is two things. One is that 85% of science centers in the United States are private nonprofits, which means the only thing they have to deal with are their own boards of directors, which is not trivial, of course. But science centers in other parts, particularly in Europe, that get heavier government funding, also have to deal with some heavier biases and perspectives. And we're talking about a community, particularly in Western Europe, whose consciousness of civil liberty is even more extreme than ours in many ways in the post-World War II era. So they are, by God, going to want to get some messaging in there, and we need to be prepared for that. We think we will. I'm sure we will, but it'll be automatic in something once it reaches Europe.
Well, then there are bomb programs that would have to be somehow included as well, right?
But there's also, if this does go international, there is undoubtedly going to be a supplement
Right.
that will come from the country where it is being shown that will connect it with
Oh, good.
will connect it with the particular circumstances of whether it be Finland or Sweden or Germany or wherever.
Right.
Ron,
Which is fine.
I'd like to see us do an exhibit that we'd be proud to show in Japan. And people in Japan would actually, like that first film that Barnow released in 70, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1945. When Akira Kawasaki, who did the original footage, saw it, he commented it brought him to tears. He said, I didn't think the Americans could do a film like this. He said it's the same way we felt in Japan. And I think for us to do an exhibit that met that test would really be an achievement.
That'd be a challenge too.
To argue
but
just
it's doable.
Just argue a little bit with what Alan said about there not being science. I guess I came into this meeting with the assumption that the science would be part of the exhibit, that you would show a chain reaction, that you would show how to make U-235 at Oak Ridge, because, and the reason we haven't talked about it is because I'm not going to argue that. This wonderful, discussion between Richard and Peter has been fantastic.
Yeah, we've got that nailed.
The
we don't need to go over that in
and
this
so
group. We don't need help on that.
There is a component of science that I've just assumed would be part of it, because it's part of the story.
doesn't really make sense otherwise.
It's also the part that's the least interesting to everyone in this room. I mean,
but that's because of
because
sitting around the table.
but that's not necessarily the case of the average person.
Not camera likes it.
I don't mean least interesting in the sense that we're not all interested, but in the sense that we don't want to hash it out. But the guy in the street probably does want to know a little bit about it. I mean,
remember, we're not designing the exhibit right here. We're talking a couple levels above the individual exhibit units and the individual graphic panels and the individual objects that are going to be part of the exhibit. I think that's I've assumed that the basic science behind the technology is a vital part of this exhibit.
Yeah.
But just a process point then. Normally at the next stage, not today, not this week, we'd write a big idea, we'd kick it around, we'd write sub-big ideas, and we would write some goals for the exhibit. People leaving the exhibition will, and now there's a list. On that list might be, understand that U-238 is much more common but is not fissionable. U-235 is very rare, can be made, and is fissionable. That would be one of the things we'd hope people would take away cognitively. We would have other things, though, we want them to take away, like the connection between the Manhattan Project and the security state, the connection between the Manhattan Project and dreams for solving medical issues and basic knowledge coming out, and unlimited energy, the desire to win a war and to not get beaten in the war, and to have something for. We have a list of these things we want people to walk away knowing, understanding, perhaps feelings we'd like them to have. Maybe we'd like them to be ambiguous about the role of big science and technology. So it's going to be a long list. So I think it's a little too early to write that list now.
Right.
We are going to write it. My comment was that I didn't think it was going to be dominated by science. I predict that when you finish this list, it's going to be 70% history. It's going to be maybe 20% talking about science and society, and 10% is going to be things like U-235 and U-238.
Can I just ask, how do you distinguish between history and science and society? That, just as an analytic point, will help me.
Well, for me, being neither a historian nor a socialist, but I would say the history is the documentary evidence, the dates, the people, the circumstances, and science and society is the interaction between the technology and the science and people's motivations and opportunities and challenges.
So it's a fact that Oppenheimer and Truman had a discussion, historical fact, that there was a discussion. What evolved from that dynamic
Right.
And is a question of science and society.
So with that breakdown, would science museums not then be interested in an exhibit like that?
Okay, well, this is a tricky question. It's how we market this exhibit, for example, to a science center. And I think it will be challenging to them. They'd be much happier with an exhibit about how airplanes fly. Kind of straightforward. But there's an increasing feeling that they need to talk about the consequences. And the new next generation science standards are going to force both, I think, the museums and the schools to look at science and society issues, which they otherwise can easily ignore. And it's certainly going to force them to start looking at engineering as a human enterprise, which they generally engineering is just applied science, and we don't have time for it this year. So I think there are forces that are going to make this exhibit in higher demand than it would be today. It's my own opinion. But I think I'm being challenged on my version of science and society.
You have the misfortune of having a sociologist in the room, and the only thing I say about this is that any one of the acts that we're talking about, a factual interaction between people, is ipso facto a social interaction between people. It does not mean that every single thing you have to say, well, how did they come to see each other in the hallway, or any kind of complex things like that. But I think to separate out that if you're asking a question, the one about how did people come to be part of this project? How were they recruited? How did people come to be spoken to about doing this? I'm imagining a map of some kind where people were, and then Oppenheimer was going around, a little mini train moving around, that he is trying to recruit people and talk to people, and that we're asking questions or talking about what motivated people to go from this place to this place. Why did they decide to do this?
But that's a presentational issue.
Okay, but the presentational issue, again, as a technical presentation issue, to separate out something to say, well, this is just the historical thing and that the social thing comes later. I'll tell you another way to think about social for me is to say, well, what about publics who weren't part of this? That's another way to think about the social implications or social things, is to say that we have a separate thing that asks, once the privacy was over, etc., how does it interact with public things? And I say this, I'm not trying to push my own particular discipline or anything else. I'm here largely because I have done historical work on a particular set of issues. But I do think that in humanizing this and making it an interesting set of things for people to look at and participate in, the more things that we have that are related to actual people and their lived experience, I think will be valuable.
I think, again, I don't think anybody disagrees. I think it's just a matter of presentation. When we distinguish, I think when we talk distinguishing history, factual history from science and society is a false way to describe it. All I think we mean here is that if you walk into an exhibit and you see a picture of Kennedy and Khrushchev sitting side by side, as I showed on a slide there, it happened, we know it happened. But if you don't give more information, if you don't give context, if you don't make it relevant, factually it happened in history. Okay, Oppenheimer, Truman had a meeting. It happened in history. Okay, but that's not enough in a presentation point of view in order to capture exactly the points that you're making. And our exhibit has to embrace that level of detail.